Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, on a special Halloween episode of Central Booking, it's Fun and Frights with Cryptmaster Chucky himself, Charles F. Rosenay. We all know that the scariest of scary stories are the true ones, and Charles's most recent book, inspired by the notion that there's always that one unexplained experience, is positively otherworldly. Titled True Ghost Stories of Connecticut, first-hand paranormal accounts by individuals who experienced them, the book collects dozens of stories told not only by trained paranormal investigators, psychics, mediums, and ghost hunters, but everyday people who have experienced, well, the unexplained. From the playful and perplexed to the predatory and profane, Connecticut has more than its share of things that go bump and boo in the night. Well known for his creeptastic contributions to local culture, Charles's name is synonymous with seasonal attractions such as the original Fright Haven and East Haven's The Haunted Trolley, as well as Paracon, Connecticut's first paranormal convention. Charles got his start with the Beatles' Magical History Tour in Liverpool and the Dracula Tour to Transylvania, both of which are ongoing, and also is an in-demand MC, DJ, entertainer, and party host. Additionally, you can check him out when he brings the inaugural Salem Paracon to Salem State University this November 11th and 12th. Links to all these attractions and events can be found in the video description. Beyond True Ghost Stories of Connecticut, Charles is the author of the Book of Top 10 Horror Lists, which collects, you guessed it, specially cultivated top 10 lists of favorite monster movies and themes from a who's who of celebrity figures, a whopping 100 of them in total. Now, join us as Charles F. Rosenay reveals his own history with Connecticut's paranormal activity. And happy Halloween! Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. This is our official Halloween episode, and I am delighted to be in conversation with the spooktacular Charles Rosenay, who is also known as Cryptmaster Chucky. You may have heard that title before. He has a brand new book out, True Ghost Stories of Connecticut. Seems like the perfect time of year to be discussing this book. Welcome to the show, my friend Charles.
I am great to be here and great to be spooktacular with you.
You totally are. And I have to say, anybody, who has 3 exclamation points in their name, I can get behind that. So, this is my kind of show, I think. So I want to ask you, of course, all about this new book, but I think, an appropriate starting point would be simply this. On the back of the book, it says, there's always that one unexplained experience. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us how that's sort of a jumping off point for what people will find in this book.
So in putting together the book True Ghost Stories of Connecticut, I had 2 criteria, John. One was that it had something to do with Connecticut. And there's only one story that doesn't, but we'll give him a pass. It's the gentleman who wrote the foreword for the book, because his story isn't based in or around Connecticut. But the other was much more important, and that it was true, that it was an actual occurrence. I say this in interview. I didn't want it flowered up. I didn't want it embellished. I didn't want someone to make it more scary and add things that weren't really accurate. I wanted, if they didn't write well, it's okay. I could edit it. If they didn't have a story, a photo, I'll find something that will accompany the article, the chapter. But I didn't want someone making something up, because that will come and bite you. I wanted true stories, and all the people that I approached and got stories from were people who I respected. It was either paranormal experts, it was people who were at any of my conventions who I knew personally. It was talk show people who ran their own podcasts. And it was my colleagues, because over the past 4 or 5 years, I've really immersed myself in the paranormal field. I'm one half of a partner in something I've branded the shaman and the showman. And I have different shamans now, and we go out and we do paranormal investigations, we produce conventions, we do library appearances where we talk about the book and all this cool stuff. But in being part of this paranormal community, I thought that everyone had 1, 2, a dozen, occurrences. Some have it every time they go out. I mean, they're clairvoyant, they're mediums, they're psychics. They have continual encounters. I wanted the one that made you go, wow, the one that was, oh my God, jaw dropping. And so, when I do libraries and I read a few chapters in the book, when I do, one or two in particular, I see the reaction of the crowd when I hit that, point of the story where it's, and the breath, the breath is taken away because it's such a strong, and that's what I aim for, and that's what I think I've achieved in the book. There's so many of those wow moments and so many great scenarios where people just told the story and told it so well. And I think there's two or three of my own occurrences in the book. And it's funny, John, you start me on and I go on tangents, but allow me to tell you that when I was writing the book and decided to write the book, I realized that I had an experience in college with the Pink Lady of New Haven. And you Google it, you don't see a lot on there. You talk to some old timers, you talk to people, and they don't know of the Pink Lady. Everyone's heard of the White Lady, and she's in Union Cemetery, or she travels between Union Cemetery and Stepney Cemetery. And you hear about this ghost and that ghost. But for some reason, the Pink Lady has slipped through the cracks or has disappeared from everyone's consciousness. And it really fell out of my psyche too. I don't know if it was repressed memory, but until I started this book, I had forgotten
Right.
that I had this unbelievable experience in college. And it wasn't just once, because I went back there the second time with my parents because they didn't believe me when I came home and told them that I actually saw a ghost. And we went back the second night and the same thing happened. Third night, I brought a bunch of friends and I looked around to see if maybe someone is playing a trick. Maybe they've got projection cameras. They didn't have projection cameras in those days. No one was doing any tricks. And the third time it happened, and I said, well, I don't, this is it. I've proven to myself that this is truly a ghost occurrence. And I'd forgotten about it till it was time to write the book. And I wrote another story, which happened to me and was even more amazing and more powerful. And my wife wouldn't let me put it in the book because she said, no, I don't want our kids to read it. I don't want them to know that such and such happened where it happened. So my best story, I was not even able to put in the book. And I'm just very, very proud of it. And it's doing so well. You can get it on Amazon like every book, but there's a lot of folks who are writing in and saying, Charles, I want a signed copy of it.
Right.
And we have a website, www.paranormalconnecticut.com, where if people go to that website, there's an email, I think there's a phone number, and you can get a signed copy. But the other way is to go to conventions and to go to libraries, because I'm there all the time doing appearances, and I'd love to sign it in person. I think I answered your question and went beyond, right?
No, I loved it. You did. But that's great. I think there's nothing better than a signed book. It's such a unique sort of keepsake, and now is the perfect time. And I love too that you mentioned the story of the Pink Lady, because that actually was probably my favorite story in this book, because I had never heard of that. And just the fact that it happened so consistently night after night after night, I mean, that's pretty, uncommon and extraordinary. So it really stood
Right.
out to me. But it's also funny how you mentioned, reading other people's stories can sort of trigger memories within you that you forgot about. And then you think twice and you say, wow, yeah, I have experienced, that thing that cannot be explained.
In the Pink Lady story, I mentioned that it was a friend from college named Ed Piazza, who since moved to California, who I had lost touch with, and sort of said hello, and we were friends on Facebook. But I thought it was really important because I didn't want my memory to cheat me, and I actually sent him the preliminary chapter to that book before I printed it. I said, Ed, if I've left out anything, if I've spruced it up in any way, please tell me. And he said, Charles, to the word, that's the story. I know of it. It happened to him a few times. We'll tell people, because hopefully they'll get the book anyway, that in New Haven, around Ferry Street, in the Fairhaven section of New Haven, which is not a great neighborhood now, and was not a great neighborhood when I went there. But him and we always said we're going to go and check out the Pink Lady. And I said, all right, whatever you're saying. I don't know who the Pink Lady is. Is it a hooker? I don't even know. Is it a stripper? in those days there was a TV show called something in the Pink Lady. And I said, I don't know, maybe it's these Japanese singers. I had no idea what he was going to take me to. And I'd forgotten about it. And he brought it up once or twice. And one night we went to one of these old clubs that don't even exist in New Haven. I don't know if it was the Agora Ballroom or Oxford Ale House or Arcadia Ballroom, one of these really cool clubs that were around the time when, Toads was really also a great place. And we got out early one night, and he said, you want to go see the Pink Lady? And I said, well, it's midnight. Are you sure we should go now? He goes, now's the best time to go. And I called my parents, found a phone booth. They didn't have cell phones then. I said, I'm going to be late. It's okay. I'm going out with my friend. We're doing, this mystery ride. He's not telling me what it's about. And he took me in his car, and he took me for a ride. And I don't know this neighborhood. And he says, I think this is the bridge we have to sit under. And he parks, and he turns off the engine. And John, he tells me the story of this gal who met her lover, who met her husband, her love to be, and everything was perfect in their lives. They found this beautiful home that they adored, that they said, for the rest of our lives, until forever, we'll live in this home. But we make plans, and God changes them. And in this case, sure enough, he was called off to war. And I think you could guess what happened next. He was killed in the war. But before that happened, she said to him, I understand you're going to war. You'll be fine. Don't worry. You come home. In fact, I'll know you come home because I want you to rent a car or get a car. And when you come around the corner, because when you leave this bridge, there's a corner, and you go around the corner, I want you to put on your high beams, flash them twice, whatever you need to do. And I will come out on the porch on my pink negligee, and you will know that I'm ready for you, and we'll pick off where we left off. And of course, he died. So what Ed and I did is we stayed under the bridge. He told me the whole story. He traveled 2 blocks, took that corner, flashed his brights twice. And my hand to God, John, this specter, this ghost came out with a flowing pink dress. I can remember it now like it was yesterday. White face or no face, black eyes. She looked out, if there was any eyes to look out, and then just, I want to say levitated, but disappeared back into the house.
Right.
And the next night we went around midnight with my parents, and the same exact thing happened. That's why on the third night I looked across the street to see if anyone had a film projector to see, because each night it happened. And I don't think we ever went back. Maybe we brought some girls, in those days to scare them. But every single time we went, it was there. Now, when I was ready to put out the book, I wanted to go back and see if it would still happen again. I thought, well, if it happened then, it would happen now. But the whole neighborhood was torn down. The house was gone. We couldn't even find, that same block that it was on. So I hope that, she passed on and joined her, forever love somehow. But yeah, that's the story of the Pink Lady. I'm shocked that when we Google it, it's not everywhere and people don't remember it. Because when I did tell it to someone back then at the time, they said, well, how do you know it wasn't World War One and that he had to come around with his bike and put on his flashing lights? I said, I don't know, but here's the story. Here's what I experienced. And the part of seeing her was 100% true.
That's incredible. And if you liked hearing that story, I mean, all the more reason to pick up this book, because there are so many other stories, like that. And I did want to ask you, one of my takeaways, from this book is that ghosts present themselves, differently to different people and with very different intent. It can be everything from playful to very predatory. So I'm wondering if you can just briefly introduce us to sort of the range of encounters that readers will get within this book, because it is
Yeah,
both sides of the spectrum.
it's a great question. People say, am I afraid of ghosts? And then what is a ghost? And these are questions that have been debated for many years, and I'm certainly not an expert. But what I have found, and it's logical, and if you believe in ghosts and you believe there's entities and beings and all that, or whether it's residual energy or whatever, if you go to a concert and there's 1,000 people, how many of those people are evil? I'd say 0. And then you go into a city and there's 50,000 people, and how many are malicious? How many are bad? Mischievous, probably a ton of them. But someone who'll, I don't know what, kill an animal, God forbid, anything bad, maybe one out of 100,000. So my concept is, or my belief is that if there's ghosts, then it's going to be a similar ratio of one ghost or one entity per thousands might be that, vicious, malevolent being. Thank goodness I've never encountered that. Some of the people in the book have. What you tend to find more is mischievous. Why haven't they crossed over? Why are they still in these places? I have a theory for that too. I think that if there's places that people just absolutely loved being in, what's the first? Your home. You have your greatest memories of your folks, growing up with them, and the happiness and the stuff you shared and the joy in most cases. That's the number one. Then what else? Theaters, churches, synagogues, libraries, schools, places where you enjoyed and had fun and sang and prayed and did great stuff. Well, if you don't know that you have to cross over, well, those are the places you're going to want to be at. You're going to want to be at the places that gave you joy. And do they know that they haven't crossed over? Maybe they don't want to, or maybe they don't know they have to, or maybe they've never had someone who can help them do that. So now that was the introduction to the question of so many varied stories. Yes, it runs the gamut from well, let's touch upon the forward in the book, because that's the only one that isn't necessarily a ghost story. It didn't take place in Connecticut, but because the amazing Kreskin gave me the forward, and he's also a guest at an upcoming convention. Hopefully I can touch on that. But because he's such a dear friend and such a special person, and if there's any of your viewers, I doubt it, who never heard of the amazing Kreskin, let me preface by saying, when you think of magic, you think of Houdini. When you think of paranormal, especially if you're from Connecticut, the Conjuring movies and all that, you think of the Warrens, right?
Yeah, we're going
If
to
you
come back
think
to
of
them for sure.
you think of mentalism and mind reading, it's Kreskin. And he gave me the forward. He was so nice to do that, forward by the amazing Kreskin. And part of his forward is telling the story. And again, I'll give away another story because hopefully it will entice people who are watching or listening to get a taste of these great stories. I do a few in the library too, and I tell the one about the Bridgeport Hospital one. That I won't tell. But the one about Kreskin is amazing because, the guy went back Johnny Carson days, and he was doing gigs, probably 300 gigs a year, flying to Bangor and flying to Michigan, and you name it, he was flying there, to the point where when he got to the airport in Newark, where he was close to living in, they would say, "Oh, come on, Kreskin, you're on board, get on." They would know he was on. They'd walk him through. There's no TSA, but they still didn't search him. They didn't care about security because this was Kreskin flying 300 times a year, except once, right, John? This one time, for some reason, he overslept, and he swears he's never overslept in his life. And this one time, he went a different route to the airport. Why he did this different route? Maybe he thought it would cut off some time, but he was a creature of habit. He would always be on time. He never missed a gig. He was never late for a gig, and certainly never late for a flight. And this day he got to the airport and they said, "Kreskin, I'm sorry, the plane is closed. We can't get you on." He goes, "You have to. I've never missed a flight. I've never missed a gig. I've never been late." And they said, "We're going to get you on another plane. Don't worry." But you know what happens next, right? The plane crashes. The plane crashes.
And he was
And
not
on the other side, they're going through the luggage thinking that Kreskin was on this plane. And where's his luggage? It wasn't here. Well, he got another flight. But what was it, John? To this day, he doesn't have the answer. That somehow compelled him, and it wasn't, he says it wasn't telepathic. He did not get a reading, and he did not know in advance that this plane was going to crash. All he knows, he had to get to a gig, but yet he was late. He slept late. He took a different route. Something, somewhere, somehow caused him to miss the flight that crashed. And he tells that story as part of his forward. And I said, I have to include it. And even though it's not about Connecticut, it's universal. It's just such an amazing story that he doesn't tell in his show. He doesn't tell it as part of his routine. But I'm so honored that's a part of this book that he tells it in the book.
Right. It's an incredible story. And, just to speak to, the staying power of the amazing Kreskin, I have to say, I'm a big fan of the Golden Girls, and we watch reruns all the time. And he is name dropped like 2 or 3 times throughout the run of the series. Like Sophia is always talking about, who am I, Kreskin? I don't have all the answers. But I mean, what more do you need to know? If you need to know about Kreskin, like, if the Golden Girls are talking about you, you're a big deal. And the fact that he, is still relevant is just awesome. And so the fact that he contributed the forward to this book is, thumbs
Well, I
up.
appreciate that, and we're plugging the book, and I appreciate that. But this event that's coming up November 11th and 12th is the Salem Paranormal and Horror Convention, salemparacon.org. And I am just so honored that Kreskin's going to be there. The amazing Kreskin is one of our special guests, and he'll be there to sign autographs, meet fans. He'll probably read your mind. What he'll do is he'll usually shake your hand. And when he shakes your hand, if your hand doesn't fall off, because the strength of this man is amazing, I think what he does is part of his powers is in shaking someone's hands, he gets a read of their personality. And then, he'll have books to sign and all kind of nice merch. But yeah, he'll be at this convention. So if you want to meet a living legend, someone who's just such a inspiration for me, and someone who's, still doing what he does. And, when you put him on a stage, if he forgets your name, okay. If he forgets that he said something 10 minutes ago, okay, you put him on the stage. And John, he's in his zone. He's right into his act. He's reading people's minds. He's telling people what has happened a week ago and what this and what this. Just he's written a lot of books, but he's never written the book on how he does it. That's the one I want. If we can do that, you and I will have another show just on that.
I know you got to go see it in person, but you go for Kreskin and you also get Mr. Charles Rosenay. How can you go wrong? You cannot go wrong. That's great, and really, what a wonderful opportunity to meet him. So I have to ask you too a little bit about your background, because I think you mentioned briefly before that you sort of stumbled into this, but you've done so many other things. People know you for your tours of terror. You do the Dracula tour in Transylvania. I have a very good friend who is like Dracula obsessed, and I need to send her on this tour because she would love it. But you've done Haunted London, you've done things with the Beatles. So can you tell us a bit about what you've done before the paranormal? Because you have an extremely interesting past.
There's a Beatles song called "It's All Too Much." I think it's on the Yellow Sub soundtrack. I have been in the promotion field and the music field literally since I was in high school. Always loved the Beatles, of course, and wasn't able to play an instrument. So that somehow transformed into me being a DJ. And that's really my main business.
Right.
My main gig is I still do parties. I'm still out there, not on the radio, but I'm on a station, but that's nothing to do with anything we're doing. But, bringing people happiness and joy and doing weddings and bar mitzvahs and school dances and you name it. And when I was in college, I started doing Beatles conventions because I felt there was a need for them in Connecticut. And that, I guess, gave birth to a magazine that I published for 20 years called Good Day Sunshine. And that somehow, then we did Beatle tours to Liverpool, which this year was my 40th anniversary. We're doing that 1983. Well, someone said, Charles, you love these Beatle tours. Don't you love anything else? I go, well, yeah, growing up, baseball, Beatles, and monsters.
Yes.
That was always that until I discovered girls. Those were my three things. And monsters was always with me. The first movie I ever saw was Bride of Frankenstein with my mom. And it took a few days to get under my skin and get in the right vein. But once I did, I loved horror movies. And in those days, we didn't have, you couldn't stream.
Right.
You didn't have Netflix. Forget DVDs. There was no videos. So the only way you could see a horror movie or a monster movie was in the movie theater or by going to the Bible. You know what the Bible was? The TV guide.
Right.
And we would circle what was coming up. The Mummy, Dracula, we would plan our week by what we were watching, whether it was TV, the Monkeys and Adam's Family or the Munsters or Get Smart, whatever, or what movies were on. And if two things were on at the same time, forget it, because you couldn't video, you would have to miss one or hope that it was on reruns.
Right.
Anyway, so my buddy goes, well, Charles, what else you love? And I told him Monster. He goes, well, why don't you do monster tours? And I said, wait a second, that's not even possible. Transylvania, Eastern Europe, third world country. Well, it was possible. There were these tiny tours going on where people would go to 3 or 4 Eastern European countries and they would visit one day, maybe a castle in Dracula. I thought, well, why can't we do a whole week of that, combining the lore, the fiction, and the fun of Dracula with the history, the truth, and everything involving Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, right? So we combined both of those, and it was the best of both worlds. And it wasn't one of these senior citizen tours where you visit a castle and then you go to sleep at 7 o'clock, 5 o'clock at night. We would do events at night. We'd go to golf clubs and everything else. Well, 25 years later, it's our anniversary. The Dracula tour is still going on, dractours.com, and we still bring people there. Well, I mentioned that I published a Beatles magazine, and that went on for 20 years, and that was a good way to promote all the things I did. Well, I had sort of the horror version of that, something on Examiner called National Horror Happenings. And this wasn't the Examiner like the National Examiner, this newspaper, and that gave stupid rumors. It was an online news source. And that's how we met. Yes. And I'm glad I'm able to work that into our conversation, because it got very few hits. And if I made 2 pennies on a post, I was like, oh, this is ecstatic. We didn't do it for money. We did it to, be out there. And National Horror Happenings, I would review movies, I would preview movies, I would do monster reports. But once out of clear blue sky, I did a top 10 list from a celebrity, and it got hundreds of hits. And I'm like, whoa, I got to do this again. And I did 70 of them through the years that was online. And each one of them always got really good eyeballs and results. So my first book was a compilation of those lists called The Book of Top 10 Horror Lists. And that came out in COVID because I was going out of my mind, not being able to DJ, not doing tours, not doing conventions, not booking bands. What did I do? I became an author. And that was the first of 3 books. And it was so much fun. And I love the process so much that, the more I was doing the horror, the more I realized how much I did not repressed it, but I'd forgotten that it was such a big love of mine. What I didn't forget is the tours and the fact that I opened up haunted attractions in Connecticut. You asked me, and I said it's all too much. It really is. So for 15 years or so, I was running Connecticut's biggest indoor haunted attraction. Right. And we'd scare the pants off of people. And I sold it in COVID, didn't think that, we'd be able to stay open. A company that had a bunch of other haunted attractions throughout the country bought it. They're doing great with it. But when my non-compete expired, I started doing something called the Haunted Trolley, which is an ancient trolley in East Haven, Connecticut, and people go aboard it. And last year we did more of a psychic event. This year it's more murder mystery. Nice. By the time this airs, it'll probably be over because we do it every, weekend in October. But all my loves for horror and monsters broadened because, if you're a paranormal purist, you may not think that there's a connection between the fakeness, the fiction of horror. And if you're a horror fan, you probably don't, delve into the supernatural and all that. I've expanded my horizons of this monster horror world to become very entrenched in the paranormal world, to the point where I go on paranormal events. I produce the paranormal conventions. I'm somewhat of an investigator, but I'm the furthest thing from an expert. I just doing it because, again, it's part of the things that are part of my portfolio of what I do to do events where people have fun and I have fun. I'll never do something that I wouldn't myself pay to go on. And that's
Right.
been, many years of success somehow. And same with the books. I would never put out a book that I myself wouldn't buy, or go up to the convention and say, I want your autograph. Will you sign your book? I'm just, honored to be on that other side, like I mentioned.
No, that's awesome. But it's so obvious, that you do it for the love of it. And I think that that's what translates, and that's what keeps it worthwhile. I think we're similar in that money, maybe we make a little, maybe we don't, but like we're so
Yeah.
into what we're doing. And
Yes.
I'm glad that you mentioned Examiner, because I wrote for them too, and I had the pleasure of interviewing you way back when. And now I'm thinking all those interviews I did, I've always thought maybe I should compile them into a book. Look, you did that. Maybe I will one day. But I am so glad that you said that maybe you would earn 2 pennies with an article, because I always used to joke with people. They'd be like, "Oh, you make serious money at this?" And I'd be like, "I literally make partial pennies." And they'd be like, "How is that even possible?" Well, you
Right.
are the proof.
It's true. People who did Examiner, unless they somehow hit it strong and got 100,000, and they had followers and all that, we did it because we loved to do it. It was a way to express ourselves. And the fact that we made 2 cents on a highly read article, that was that was gravy. We never did it
Right?
for that. People also said you did so many interviews through the years. At my Beatle conventions, I would MC the shows. So if I had, the Beatles' first drummer, Pete Best, or I had John Lennon's sister, or got so many people who've left us because they're no longer here, I interviewed them all. And I think
Right.
that would make also for a great book. I just never recorded all of those.
Right.
I
Right.
did it live at the convention. And if a fan recorded it and sent it to me, oh, God bless you for that. But I never had them. And that would have made an amazing book.
I know Beatlemania is forever. I mean,
Yeah.
but yeah, these are the things we don't think of until it's too late. But great story. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Ed and Lorraine Warren. You already mentioned them. The book is dedicated to them, among other people. If you're in Connecticut, you know them. If you're involved in paranormal investigation, you know them. They're even
Yeah.
widely more so known now because of the Conjuring movies and all the film
Right.
franchises. But can you
Right.
tell me, one, about sort of your personal knowledge of them, and then two, what their contributions really are to the paranormal realm, because they are sort of the top. Like if you're going to
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about paranormal, you're going to talk about the Warrens.
they're the OGs. They're the
Yeah,
originals.
they are. They're the
And,
goats.
and we knew them because we lived in Connecticut. And if you're aware and you picked up what the New Haven Advocate or whatever it was, you would see an ad at Central Connecticut State College or Southern Connecticut State University, or one of these. They would do actual lectures where they would show footage on a big screen. And this was like, what? This was amazing stuff for someone who loved, ghost stories. In those days, I saw them live and I was like, wow, jaw dropping. But they were like your neighbors. They lived in Monroe. You'd see them shopping. It wasn't a big deal. They were, that never is a big deal when it's in your backyard. And then all of a sudden, the Conjuring franchise hits big, and everyone has heard of the Warrens and everyone knows who they are. But back when I was doing the Dracula tours, we had a few celebrity guests on a few of the tours. We had Butch Patrick, Eddie Munster,
Right.
and we had a few of the Hammer horror movie scream queens and some authors. But when we started that ghost tour, I said, well, why don't we bring on the Warrens? The Warrens would be great guests. They're local. We could bring them along every place they go. Elaine could, Lorraine, not Elaine, Lorraine could see if there's any entities, if she feels anything at these places. Well, they were too old by the time I asked. It was late 90s or 2000s, and they were still alive, but not as well as they were when they were younger. And they suggested a gentleman by the name of John Zaffis. And I said, who is he? I've never heard of him. I know, no mean to be rude. And they said, well, he's our nephew. And it turned out that John Zaffis became a very famous paranormal investigator in his own right, hosted a show called The Haunted Collector. It's been at my conventions, but there was a plan for us to meet with the Warrens. And we'd go over to the house. And I say I had a partner named Danny, and Danny visited the Warrens' home. I think I was in England on a Beatles tour and couldn't go. And we were going to pitch them and give it one more shot for them to be guests on our ghost tour. And Danny goes over the house, and they were the friendliest to him. The rain was either asleep already or out for the night or away. I don't remember, but Ed took him around and took him to the basement because it wasn't a museum. It was the cellar. And what was in the cellar? All of the haunted artifacts, from haunted dolls to haunted rocks to haunted books to anything haunted was kept in the basement. And most of it was out in the open, because it was blessed, it was whatever. But there was one item that Danny saw that you couldn't miss. And Ed said, whatever you do, don't touch it, don't go near it. You don't even look at it. And that was under glass and under lock. And what was that? It was the
Well, no,
Annabelle.
it's Annabelle.
The Annabelle doll. What else? And Danny's, sort of like looking at it, and it looks like a Raggedy Ann. It doesn't look very possessed or scary. At which point Ed is ready to show him all the other stuff, and Ed's phone rings. And this is probably, you're going to hear a million Warren stories, and this one is probably, I don't know, the funniest or what happens at that point is Danny's in this basement looking around, and he doesn't know what to do, what to touch. He's staying still. When you know what happens, John? The Annabelle doll's locked glass opens up. It opens up in front of Danny. Danny does a half a second and then does a beeline up the stairs to find Ed, because Danny, who probably ran track, I know he played soccer and basketball and baseball, but he never ran as fast as he did that day.
He never moved so quick.
Never moved so quick. He said, and he told it how the glass opened up and the Annabelle doll was literally 2 feet from his face. And that's my best takeaway from the Warrens. But in my book, so many of the people who contributed, were disciples of
Right.
the Warrens, who they were students of the Warrens. They were videographers of theirs. They went on their, haunted explorations. And so their imprint is all over the book, and it's all over the conventions I do. When we have the Salem Paracon, November 11th and 12th, so many of the guests that are there, are people who studied the Warrens and have kind of dedicated their lives to follow in the footsteps of the Warrens, who didn't really make money on, the investigations. They were there doing God's work. They were trying to take away spirits, doing exorcisms. If there was an ominous or an evil, entity, they were there to make it, to make it good. So, they did amazing stuff. And I hope they made money as the years went on, and the franchise and all that. And I hope their daughter and their son-in-law and their nephews and all of them have reaped the same benefits. And I think they have. But you know what? If it wasn't for the Warrens, who knows if there would be that much of a national recognition of paranormal and spooks and all that great stuff, and ghost hunting. It's always been ghost hunting. Medieval days, you go back and people say, wow, you're in Connecticut, what you always say is Connecticut haunted. Well, I say, and I've learned this from other people, I'm not the first one to say it, Connecticut is one of the most haunted states. And it's usually the states where there was always a lot of war, a lot of bloodshed. But then you add to that how much of our land we've built over Indian reservations, Native American land. They're not happy with that. There's a lot of really reasons for there to be haunted areas in Connecticut, and there are. I'm not taking away anything from Virginia or Pennsylvania or Georgia or any places where people know there's hauntings. Yes, everywhere you're going to find haunted places. Just that Connecticut, for being a small state, has a ton of them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's going to be a question for you in a second. But just a real quick note, I'm so glad that you shared that story about your friend in the Warrens, because, I was thinking of that story. I'd almost asked you to share it, and then you gave us so many stories for free that I would have felt bad, and I would have just said, you got to read the book. You got that story. But the other thing I love is that the Warrens show up so frequently in these stories, and you really do get an idea of, not only how prevalent they were, but, what great mentors they were for up and coming investigators. And so their legacy is going to carry on strongly for many, many years to come.
So true. No, I'm glad you said that. I always try to give credit where credit's due, and the buck stops there. When they were doing what they were doing, no, it wasn't well known unless a case made, unless the case was on the Amityville level, the Conjuring level, unless it was that where there were killings or deaths and there was, bigger reasons why, because those are two out of hundreds that they were on. Yeah, we both share in giving them the credit they deserve.
Well, you were, a great carrier of the torch. So I tipped my hat to you if I was wearing one. Sorry. So I have to ask you, you mentioned how haunted Connecticut is. And I mean, you read this book and you realize that, yes, and it's all around Connecticut. If you live in or around Derby, you will be surprised at how many of these stories take place in Derby. I had no idea. But, it is the spooky season. People are looking to have an experience. Are there any hot spots that you want to share for people looking for an experience? And I'm going to give you a second part to that question too, because I think it's important, that people should probably remember that they be respectful and show responsibility to this and not just do it as, fun and games, because you don't necessarily know how that's going to work out.
Yeah, I hear that people, oh, we're going to break into this place and we're going to bring a Ouija board and we're going to light a. No, don't
That's not
do
the way
that.
to do it.
Please don't do it. Forget the Ouija board, first of all, because that could be a conduit. It could be, a portal to negative stuff. Secondly, you don't break into places. So many places have been boarded up and have been put off limits because people were doing just that. If a paranormal investigator knows what they're doing and they go to a place, first get permission. Permission goes a long way. You get permission, you get access. You bring other people. You bring other people. You have respect. You can continue to do that. I learned my lesson the hard way. I was with a partner and we went to a lot of amazing places, and we took a chance and went to a place called Dudleytown.
Mm-hmm.
And if you grew up and you knew anything about ghosts in Connecticut, Dudleytown was the place you were told to stay away from.
Right.
And we went there 3 times, and after the 3rd time, we got a cease and desist. And okay, so we haven't gone back there, we won't. But I wrote about some of the things that happened in Dudleytown in my book, and it's one of the few where there's a second chapter, if I remember correctly, because Dudleytown is such an important historic and such a place where ghost stories just emanate, and weirdness, not just ghost stories, just unexplained weirdness. So I forgot your question, but
yeah, that was good enough. I probably shouldn't be asking you to tell people hotspots, but I'm glad you hit up.
Wait. So the second part to my answer is don't just go with someone who's reputable. Go with another paranormal person who's had experience, because they'll have equipment, they'll have spirit boxes or meters or voice, but they'll have equipment that will enhance the experience and will also give you a better chance of finding a spirit that may want to be reached. If you go by yourself and you don't have that equipment, you might not have a result, but you might have a spirit that you probably don't want to reach. We do a lot of these investigations, and when I do them, I promote it on Facebook, and I'll take 20 people with me and we'll make a night out of it.
Right.
We'll go to a restaurant, I'll do an orientation, I'll try to sell copies of my book, and then I'll turn it over to my partner, whoever the shaman is of the shaman and the showman, and they'll kind of conduct the investigation wherever it may be. We've done a lot of things in the valley, and we've done places in Middlebury and in Waterbury and Stratford, so many places. We continue to do more places. But if you can do those kind of scenarios, especially if you're starting out, everyone starts out, and after 5, visits, they're an expert. I'm going to say it again. There's no such thing as an expert in the unknown and the unexplained. I mean, as long as there's an before it, no one's an expert.
It's a good point. And all right, if you want hot spots, just read the book. You'll get them. But speaking of the book, you are working on a second collection of stories, so I hear, and you're actually, you're soliciting stories from people who may be watching this episode. So if you at home, have a story of some unexplained encounter or phenomenon that you might want to share. Tell us what you're looking for, Charles, and how people can get those stories to you.
So when I do like my library appearances and all the appearances, I'll say, raise a hand. How many people believe in the paranormal? Well, most of them do because they're in a setting where they've come to hear me speak. So and the next question is, how many of you have had an experience? And most of those same hands will go up. And I always forget to say, well, I ask them what their experience is, and they'll usually share it. And once in a while, it's book worthy, not usually. Usually, it's like lived in a home. This girl would visit me every night at 3 a.m. She'd come in the room and she'd leave. And, that's a great story. But it's not a wow. It's not, oh my gosh, because that's a common story. And I should start saying, if you had that unbelievable wow moment, please write it, because I want it in there. Whereas the first book is mostly paranormal experts. It's people who are in the field who shared their, amazing stories, because that's who I kind of solicited, those who I approached, people who became my colleagues and my people in this industry, not industry, in this universe of paranormal. So they're the ones. But in the book, I say I would love to do a second chapter, a whole second volume. And in that volume, I want everyday people. I want their unbelievable stories. And if I get another 30, 40, 50, I'll gladly put out another volume, because this is different. John, as you know, this is different than any other books that are out there. Other books might tell, these are the top 10 haunted places in Connecticut, and this is their history. Okay, great. We know that. We can Google that. We can pick up that book and read it. What's different here is it's people's true stories, and it's all gathered together as a collection and anthology in one place. And you go from one story to another, and it's these different levels of, you said, why is someone different? One is someone who's seen a ghost. One is someone who, lived with a ghost. One is someone who, missed a flight for whatever reason and lived. There's so many different stories. And, that one Bridgeport hospital story is one that everyone, if you don't get the book, pick it up and just read that story and put it back on the shelf. It's that good.
It really is. And there is something to be said for somebody telling their own story in their own voice versus somebody else telling their story, because you really get the immediacy of it and, the impact that it's had on people, whether it's days, months, years, decades, later. So great book.
You'll appreciate the book came out right before the Connecticut Paranormal Convention. And so, I'm signing in, a ton of them. And what I realized is a lot of the people who were contributors to the books, who had chapters in the book, were at the convention. They were either guest speakers, or they were vendors, or they were authors there. And I'm thinking, wait a second, people can get the book, have me sign it, and kind of do a scavenger hunt and walk around the convention. And some people walked away with, I think, 15 or 16 autographs in the same book. And that was just one of those things that, oh my gosh, you can't plan that in advance. It was one of those kismet, serendipitous scenarios where someone, if they were autograph collector, got a book full of them. And that was really cool. There's one story from a friend of mine who videotapes a lot of occurrences, and his story's in the book. And he's not a paranormal expert. He wasn't on stage. He didn't have a vendor's table. He's not an author, but he was walking around videotaping the event. Sure enough, people were coming up to him for his autograph to sign his chapter. And Hector, it was one of his highlights, was being able to be in the book and getting people to actually ask him to sign his chapter. So very special stuff.
That is brilliant. And like you said, these are the things that you can't plan. They just kind of happen. And when they do, it is like lightning in a bottle. So I have to ask, I will let you go, but final question to you. Halloween is pretty much upon us. So how do you celebrate the holiday? Do you have customs? Do you have traditions? What does Halloween look like for you?
Growing up, I never missed trick-or-treating, never. And when I got older, It's like, oh my God, I was fortunately I was always short. So if I put on the mask and put on the costume and held out the bag, most people didn't say, "Hey, aren't you too old to trick or treat?" Finally, I had friends who I went with, and eventually I had kids, so I took them trick or treating, and I think I loved it more than they did. I really do. For many years, for 12 years, I would go and host the Dracula tour to Transylvania. And when I was doing that, I was spending Halloween night in Dracula's castle.
That's
And I
amazing.
thought, well, that's the ultimate. Well, when I started doing the haunted attractions, Halloween's a pretty big night, and I had to be there to run the show, to scare people, to be the host. And that sort of now has transitioned into, which we mentioned earlier, the haunted trolley. I love Halloween. I mean, my gosh, I can't imagine there being a world without. In fact, for a few years, eh, eh, I did something which I hated, and only did it because it was Halloween. And that's in between when Fright Haven, the haunted house, stopped being in West Haven, Connecticut, and I couldn't find a place for it. It eventually wound up in Stratford, and I did sell it. But in between, I didn't get my Halloween, Joneses. I was going crazy. And a friend of mine was in the Halloween store business and actually got me to manage
Oh, really?
and be a partner in one of those Halloween pop-up shops. And yeah, did I love the people who came in? Yes. Did I love the costumes and the merch? Yes. Did I love retail? No.
No, talk about a horror story.
Everyone, that was the scariest Halloweens of my life, and not in a good way. But yeah, you're gonna probably find me at a haunted attraction, not just the night of Halloween, but all the nights leading up to it. And usually, if I could extend it into, well, that's what I do with the Salem Paracon, the Salem
Right.
Paranormal Convention, in Salem, Massachusetts. I'm kind of extending Halloween for myself and everyone else by having it November 11th, 12th. I think that might be Veterans Day weekend. But if any of your listeners or viewers want to have an amazing time, go to Salem during Halloween. Sure, it's busy. You can't park. You can't get into restaurants, but you have to do that at least once. But if you want to go leisurely and go to all the museums and have a nice time, but also want to go to an amazing paranormal and horror convention, you go November 11th and 12th, www.salemparacon.org. And I'm hosting. I'll be there to greet you at the door, and I know you're going to have a great time.
That is awesome. And there is something about like the community and celebrating this, with other people who get it. Like it is tops. Like you said, you would rather be, around all these people than alone in your house watching a movie because it's really kind of joyous. And, you at home, if Halloween is your jam, you got to pick it up. True Ghost Stories of Connecticut is available right now. And you may even find yourself, part of part two when and if that comes to be. Charles, Rosenay, thank you so much for celebrating Halloween with me and with all of us.
I loved it. Thank you for having me on. For folks who aren't crazy about getting it on Amazon, where it is available, the website for the book is www.paranormalconnecticut.com, and I'll gladly inscribe it, sign it, personalize it. But John, after all these years of us, having shared things in life, and being able to do stuff online, it's just great to be on the air with you and getting to answer your great questions. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Charles. It was such a privilege, and I love this sort of full circle moment. Like all these years later, it has to be at least a decade, probably more. And here we are going strong. Two,
Two
yeah.
decades, two
That
decades.
see now that's a scary note
Amazing.
to end on. You haven't aged, me, huh? Thank you,
We're,
Charles.
we're young monsters.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.